Jessica, so great to have you here. Thanks so much for coming on the show. How's it going?
Thanks for having me, Alex. I love listening to the pod, and man, what a week. So excited to dig
Seriously.
in.
Yeah, we got you at a great week. You're our first byline on a big story at The Information. And by the way, kudos to you and The Information. Your publication has just been scooping like crazy on the AI beat. We reference it every week here. So we'll get into that in a moment. Let's start with this report that GPT-5 might be on the way. So Business Insider has this story that says OpenAI is expected to release a materially better GPT-5 for its chatbot mid-year. And they basically talk with CEOs that have been briefed by OpenAI about this new model that's coming. It says sometime mid-year, likely during the summer. And a CEO says it's really good, like materially better. And they're actually demonstrating new capabilities, including what Business Insider says is the ability to call AI agents being developed by OpenAI to perform tasks autonomously. I mean, this could be the big one. So I'm curious what you think about this report and what we should be looking out for.
So make no mistake, I think OpenAI is actively, constantly working on a new model. And my personal opinion is it's sort of arbitrary where they kind of slice it and say, okay, this isn't 4, it's 4.5, or this isn't 4.5, it's 5. I think a lot of that decision is frankly kind of marketing and messaging to the talent out there, how they sort of benchmark their progress. But absolutely, they're working on new capabilities. We first broke the news at The Information about the agents a month or so ago. This would be, AI not just being able to answer a question for you, but actually do a task, book you a reservation, something like that. So that's the agent concept. We know they're working on it. And yeah, they're trying to push the envelope. I mean, it is a full-on race between Gemini, OpenAI, Meta's Llama, Anthropic. And I think when I see a story like what Insider did, it just says to me also that OpenAI wants the ecosystem to start talking about their next capabilities, which I think, makes sense. We're in this war for talent, war for enterprise customers. And while Gemini has kind of had mixed results in some way, there's no question that it is a hugely powerful model with incredible capabilities, and OpenAI feels like they need to respond.
It's just interesting to hear that perspective because it means OpenAI is vulnerable. And that's kind of like the theory that I've had this whole time is that these models are going to commoditize, and then you're going to basically be left with these like seemingly impenetrable research houses now with products on par with the others. So is your understanding that this is sort of the beginning of that, and this rush to differentiate is kind of what we're seeing here?
OpenAI is absolutely vulnerable, Alex. And that doesn't mean that they haven't done incredible work and are incredibly well positioned in terms of talent. But, think of their distribution relative to Google. And just the fact that Google can embed Gemini in products that billions of people use every day. OpenAI can't do that. And as we move into other phases of this AI war, I think that they face a lot of challenges, as well as opportunities because of their sort of research and technical know-how. So we are absolutely entering a phase. I completely agree that these models are converging. And, when you secretly talk to the people who are building these models inside the big companies and you say, oh, look at that benchmark, or whoop-de-doo, this thing's a little bit better at that, even they roll their eyes and kind of admit, that's all the sort of pre-work before these models are in the wild. They're all converging. And so it's a very exciting time, but it's also, I think these companies internally face a lot of major challenges. On one hand, they have to keep that research going, right? They have to keep pushing the capabilities, but at the same time, they really need to the business models, the distribution models. That's critical.
Yeah, and you did get that agent scoop. How critical do you think this agent factor is going to be? Because there's risk there, right? If you trust agents to do things for you, they make mistakes, and then who's responsible?
Personally, I'm not like a agent hype person. I mean, I think I think it is a step in a capability that can be used, but I don't think it means that, these models are kind of fully autonomous and that we can use them in new ways. But I also am struck by how early it is. We recently wrote a story at The Information where we asked early adopters and people building tech, people at OpenAI and so forth, how they were using AI. And I read the piece and I was like, shoot, I'm doing it all wrong. Like I'm sort of querying these chatbots a little like search and meanwhile there are all these use cases such as like teaching yourself French and then quizzing yourself. And so it's hard to say any one feature is or isn't important at this point. But it would be silly to think, that this next model is the cat's meow and is, a big leap towards AGI. I mean, we're so far away from that.
Right. And so we're talking about all these different research organizations and the distribution that they might get, right? Google has obviously Gemini. They can throw it into any Google product. OpenAI has Microsoft. There's a couple of interesting developments with the OpenAI Microsoft partnership this week. First of all, we're going to talk about the Inflection deal. But first of all, did you see this quote from Satya Nadella? I think it was from like the Elon Musk lawsuit where he was like describing how Microsoft is so insulated from OpenAI's, ups and downs. He's like, we're above them, we're below them, we're beside them. We own their data, we own their models. Like, what do you think that was all about?
I love that quote, Alex, and I quoted in a column I wrote in our briefing column last night, so I thought a lot about it yesterday. I mean, now this is a quote that Elon is using in his lawsuit against Sam Altman and OpenAI from an interview Satya gave. And this was when OpenAI was imploding and Satya was trying to assure people that Microsoft could progress in AI without them. But to your point, he was saying, we don't even need them. We have their IP. We know how to train it. We've got all the talent and so forth. And I think we're at this very interesting moment also in the relationship between all these startups and emerging companies. I mean, OpenAI at almost $100 billion. It's hard to call it a startup, but the reality is we don't know a lot about the relationships between the big platforms that are investing in the next generation. If in the olden days, aka 5 years ago, Microsoft would acquire a hot new technology, or Google would acquire it, Amazon would acquire it, for a host of reasons, including the fact that regulators are breathing down their neck and scrutinizing every acquisition. Microsoft and others are taking a different tack and structuring these investments where they, put some money in, but they also are getting equity in exchange for credits on their own services, so-called round tripping or potentially. And it's crazy. So when we saw that Satya quote, it was like, aha, this deal is quite complicated between the two. And I think this is where you're getting to, but we broke some news this week with the terms of Microsoft's hiring the talent from a struggling AI company, Inflection. And I actually think the terms of those deals, that deal, which we can talk about, were very similar to the list of things that Satya said they have in OpenAI. And so I think that's a clue that there is a playbook at work here for how Microsoft is trying to consume as much talent and tech in the industry without acquiring it.
Yeah, because we're obviously we're in the week where the DOJ has brought this case against Apple. We already know the FTC is trying to shut down almost all M&A in tech when it comes to big tech, at least. And that brings us, you're right to this Inflection story. This is a fascinating story. So this guy, Mustafa Suleyman, he was a co-founder of DeepMind. I think he got pushed out or sidelined because of bad behavior. Even this week, there were former or current DeepMind employees who were look at this guy. He's so basically he got hired into Microsoft to be the CEO of Copilot. It's a pretty big deal. And after he was the CEO of Inflection, which raised $1.5 billion. So of course there's concerns about what's the deal with this guy, right? Even for a CEO to leave a company like this in a lurch, really, and say, I'm going to go be the CEO at Microsoft, and somebody will pick up the pieces when I'm gone. I think he took 70 employees or something like that. It's a fascinating story. It just like kind of leaves me scratching my head on a number of fronts. So would love to hear a little bit about your reporting on what happened here, why it was structured this way. Are like the original investors in Inflection going to be pissed that they put all this money
they're
in and
pissed, Alex.
He jumped ship? So why don't you break it down for us?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating story. And I think there are a couple ways to look at it. But the facts are that Microsoft announced earlier this week that Mustafa and his co-founder were joining Microsoft to run their AI, and that they would also offer Inflection's 70 employees the chance to work at Microsoft. And instantly, I mean, my phone was ringing from the investors being like, WTF, you don't invest. Also the investors that invested in Inflection, which had an early product called Pi, chatbot that people liked, but really was not in the same league in terms of being able to compete. But Mustafa, off his name, relationships, co-founder of DeepMind, raised all this money. And but make no mistake, like the investors backed him. And then after 2 years, Microsoft was one of the largest. Then after 2 years, to find out that he had jumped ship with taking the employees, it is not what you expect as a venture capitalist. Now, the deal is, it is so interesting because it's so complicated and you can kind of see the threading of the needle. But what changed hands is Microsoft paid Inflection, I think $620 million to license its IP. But what that is essentially doing is putting some cash in Inflection's pocket. And then Inflection says, okay, shareholders, you'll get your money back and a little bit more. So if you were in the first tranche of investors, you got your money back in 50%. If you were in the second tranche, you got your money back in 10%. So they threw that bone there, but none of these investors invested to get their money back in 10% after 2 years, right? That's not the kind of return you expect. And these investors now still hold some equity in Inflection now, which is going to be a little more of a design studio or an AI studio, and who knows, but it's really, a shell of what it was. And I think it is, Microsoft is taking pains to say to shareholders, this is not an acquisition. But you get access to the tech, which I don't think they really need, but was a way to structure some payment back for shareholders to recoup something. And then you get access to the talent, which I think, all these companies are hoarding. So I think there are a couple of lessons from it too. I mean, to me, it's just very clear that if you're a traditional venture capitalist, I don't think you should be investing in AI. Like how at least in the sort of LLM kind of models where the strategics are putting billions of dollars in, and there are these complicated relationships that are, really have the risk of like restructuring the deal on a moment's notice without the shareholders knowing, which also happened in a different way with OpenAI. And so I think it's a different kind of investment. It's a different kind of game. I think it shows, the leverage that these big tech companies have. There's a flight to them from the world of startups because they have so many advantages and can compete in ways that the smaller guys can't. And Tim O'Reilly wrote an excellent op-ed for us about this, where he basically said you're seeing, really like the amassing of concentration with the big tech companies around AI is going to be very anti-competitive and squeeze all investors out. So I think it supports that. Now, I will say on the other side, if you talk to entrepreneurs about this deal, they'll say, look, companies fail sometimes. And the best thing to do when companies fail is to acknowledge it, for the founders to be honest with the team, not drag them along for years and years, because you can get dragged for a long time on $1.5 billion, and just kind of say, guys, it didn't work. We're moving on. And by the way, come with us. And we found you a kind of soft landing. So I think that is a very reasonable way to kind of look at it a bit from the point of the founders. I also think, it's understandable why investors are pissed. And so we'll see how it plays out. And I'm absolutely sure that Washington and Brussels are going to look at this. They've already said they're looking at these deals. So,
I mean, this was definitely a dodge in terms of like having to get an acquisition approved. But before we talk about that, I definitely want to talk about why Inflection failed. This is a tweet from Gavin Baker, an investor. He says, Inflection will likely be the first of many VC-backed foundation model companies to fail. Foundation models without proprietary real-time data and massive distribution for ROHF are the fastest depreciating assets in history. I mean, it goes right to what we were talking about in the beginning, right? Which is that these models, like you mentioned, coming together. And unless you have an edge, you can literally light $1.5 billion on fire overnight because you can't compete. Is that what's happening here?
I think so. I also think there's the current reality, and then everyone is preparing for the next phase of training and the next phase of compute. And I think we actually don't spend enough attention on that in the press sometimes because, from, again, the people working on these, that's top of mind for them. Just, even the architectures that got the training to this point aren't going to be the architectures that get it to the next point. And so the costs just compound. So absolutely, I think we saw this over exuberance, as we often see in private technology. For anything with AI, whether it was a foundation model or an app and so forth. I guess the only thing I'd add to Gavin's statement is, I completely agree with it in terms of the pace of erasing value, but I think all AI startups are vulnerable. I mean, we've seen companies that were trying to build features using OpenAI's APIs that have basically been obliterated because now you can do it in a model like OpenAI. So I think in the startup land, few areas are safe right now in this category.
Right. And then going back to this, antitrust or anti-competitive angle or merge, whatever, regulatory side, this was an acquisition. So how is it possible? Is it just going to be the new way that companies try to do acqui-hires without, it screws the investors. It doesn't have to go through regulatory approval. It's great if you're Microsoft. It's great if you're Mustafa Suleyman. But otherwise, it seems like you're right. And any regulator would be like a red flag city right now.
Yeah, it's absolutely going to get scrutiny as it absolutely should. I think, again, it's not unreasonable. If this was a tiny company that was failing, this kind of structure is logical, right? There's not, you can kind of see why they go this route. It benefits Microsoft in so many ways. So I think it's also, you could look at it as they structured it this way to get around antitrust. You could also look at it, they structured this way because it's better for Microsoft. You don't have to get all the complicated stuff you don't want. You just get exactly the pieces you do want. So I think it's a win-win for them in terms of economics and structure as well as regulation. But we'll see. I think it's so early in this industry, but at the same time, regulators have their eye on it. At the same time, you referenced DOJ and Apple. We've got, a DOJ and Google search trial going on from, a deal struck, I don't know, like when I was in high school. No, probably not. But you can also, these big tech companies are right to kind of keep moving with their strategy, right? You can't wait forever. But it's going to be very interesting. And I think the piece I believe strongly is that we just need to know more about these arrangements. Right. It may turn out that they're not anti-competitive because there's enough competition in the space, and but we just don't know, and that's why Satya's quote was so jarring, because it sort of said, "Oh wait, this isn't it reminded us this isn't a traditional investment. It's something much bigger.
Exactly. So this has been one of those weeks where like every day a bit of news is broken, and it's like, is Microsoft trying to distract from NVIDIA, and is NVIDIA trying to distract from Microsoft? And what about Apple and Google? Like, are they trying to steal their fire? And actually, it just seems like this is just the pace of change right now, and the pace of the way that this stuff is moving. So it brings me right to this Apple and Google deal, because it was like at the beginning of the week and now almost forgotten, but it is a huge deal. And this is a Bloomberg story that Apple's in talks to let Google Gemini power the iPhone AI features. It just strikes me as a kind of a red flag around Apple that they just shut down their self-driving car program. They put everybody toward AI. They've been teasing this AI announcement coming at WWDC. To have to rely on Google to do your AI infrastructure and put Gemini in the iPhone, similar to the way that you couldn't do search and you have Google doing search in the iPhone, it seems to indicate that Apple is so far behind on this front that they are bringing in the cavalry, right? Which I think there was this picture of it looked like Sundar and Tim Cook having dinner together. It's just like, man,
I think it was maybe Tamarind in Palo Alto, one of Tim's favorite restaurants.
Right.
It's a fascinating and also great reporting by Bloomberg on this topic. I think what's going on here is Apple has way more AI strategies than meet the eye. And some of those are hedges against their own efforts. But I do think they're doing a lot of other things. And within AI, we've got this big, large language model race where it appears that Apple is behind, working to do their own thing. But as we know, Google DeepMind, right? The roots there in talent go back a very long time. OpenAI has been a pioneer as well. So I think Apple's looking at their position and saying, okay, when it comes to like these small AI models, doing cool things on your iPhone, we got that covered. And I think, we'll hear a lot more, but I expect that will be an area, where they could, you could open your eyes in your photos or, those kinds of on-device kind of features. And then they're saying, look, we need, kind of why not try partner with Google to jumpstart our efforts in larger models and while continue on their own thing. I was at the Wall Street Journal covering Apple when it was doing this playbook with search and maps and YouTube and all the other services that they knew needed to be on iPhones and well integrated into iPhones to make them popular, but they weren't experts in themselves. And so I think that's probably the thinking inside of Apple. It's complicated, though. This court case I mentioned, where I guess we'll find out later this year what was decided in the DOJ suing over the Apple search partnership, where Google powers Apple search or search on iPhones on their devices. A Gemini deal could look a lot like that deal. That would be ballsy to announce that amid that probe. At the same time, it's so early. Like, what are the economics around partnering? I think there are just a lot of questions, but it makes sense to me, given the history between those companies, that they would be attempting a partnership on this front. And I think it does show Apple being behind in a lot of ways, but I also feel like we need to look broadly across what AI is and why it's important to the next generation of these companies. And I suspect Apple has a lot up its sleeve that we don't know about.
Right. Okay. Do I have time for one last question?
Sure.
Okay. So I wrote about Google's generative AI for Newsroom product today. So basically, this is the way that it's going to work. A Newsroom would take a primary source, maybe two. It could be a press release from a city council or a 500-page report or even a tweet. And then Google will build a draft of that story for them and then would indicate places where they should fact check or, make sure that, there's no plagiarism there, and then potentially add their own information. You run a pretty successful newsroom. Is this something you would ever think about using?
I wouldn't use this tool, Alex. I think, the information, we're all about original reporting from our own sources. And you can't piece together stuff that's out there in the world and get an information story by definition. I think there are a lot of potentially interesting ways AI can be used as a tool for reporting. Going through transcripts, searching transcripts, highlighting interesting parts of transcripts, document research, data research, basically taking all the tools we try to use today and putting them on steroids, right? I think that's incredibly exciting for the news industry. I also think AI will be used, aggregating, summarizing, that sort of thing. And overall, I think that's probably fine, but make no mistake, it's not reporting.
All right. I definitely agree. All right. We'll be back in the second half with Steve Kovac to talk about Apple. Jessica, thank you so much for being here. And thanks again for all the great reporting that you and the information are doing. We're regular citers and readers of the work, and keep it coming.
Thanks so much.
All right. Thanks for being here. We'll be back right after this.